I kinda knew this was gonna be a bumpy ride when I got here. I was born January 7th in a snowstorm. Both of my parents were heroin addicts. My mother was carried to Bedford Hospital by a family member, which is how I got my middle name, Mahdi. I was the youngest of 3 of my mother's children, 2 girls and 1 boy. My father had HIV before I was born, but my mother didn't have it. When babies are born on heroin, diapers gets involved from the very beginning. I was blessed not to be affected by the heroin. I don't quite remember living with my mother, but I heard stories about how I was left with my older sister Tamara a lot. There's a story of how a building caught on fire when I was a baby. While running out the building with me in the stroller, I fell out the back of the stroller and rolled down the steps. I also heard stories about how I used to flip out of my crib. My sister Kendra, who was 2 years older than me, went to live with my Aunt Madeline straight from the hospital. Tamara and I came a couple years after. My Aunt Madeline, who was in her 60s, with 3 crack babies. My father also was in the picture. My mother and father had an understanding with each other. They knew that they weren't in a position to raise children, so I respect the fact that they let my aunt adopt me. I would go to my mother's house on the weekends, and I would visit my father's house as well. Sometimes, my father and mother were together on the weekends. We joked, farted, and ate pancakes. I remember my mother would walk around naked, and I told my aunt on her. She was a free spirit, an Aquarius. My father was the same way, if you know what I mean, a Pisces. Now my father's house was a little different. He shared a family house. His sister and his nieces lived upstairs. He and his mother lived downstairs. I hear she used to own a beauty parlor until she got sick. My father and her argued a lot. All I remember is she did a lot of screaming. I never got a chance to know her. I got her introduced to the neighborhood early. My father's neighborhood was definitely more hood than where I lived with my aunt. My mother and father lived in the Weequahic section. My aunt lived in Orange, New Jersey at the time. I only have a couple memories with my mother before her early death. One was when my father surprised me with a dog. We were walking the dog to my mother's house, and I started running from the dog. It started chasing me, then bit me in the ass. The dog seemed to just disappear in the middle of the night. Then there was the block party at my Uncle Bill's house. A lot of family used to meet there for gatherings. I was gifted with a beautiful red bike. The house was on a hill that led to Weequahic Park. My bike rolled down the hill, never to be seen again. I remember the police coming to arrest my mother's boyfriend, Ricky, for attempting to molest my sister. I remember wanting to fight him. I probably was only like 5 years old. I also remember seeing my mother holding her hands in a lot of pain. My mother was in a dangerous situation. She was a diabetic and addicted to heroin. Chewing insulin in one arm and heroin in the other. It's a deadly combination. I didn't see my mother again after that. She mysteriously died in the hospital. So now I'm 6 years old at my mother's funeral, and I'm looking at the body just to see if she was going to blink. I didn't know, but I was being prepared for what was to come. You see, I was born in the middle of a crack epidemic in 1984. Unfortunately, I would see more than half of my loved ones in a casket before the age of 9 years old.